We ready?
Yes.
Yeah. Now it's right. Good evening, everybody. Big warm welcome to this, your church, Paul Christian Spiritualist Church. As you know, or may be aware, we've changed our way of working slightly this year, and we've introduced these Wednesday nights with different themes and different topics to engage us more, because we want to talk more, don't we?
Yes.
It's better. And do you know what? From a platform medium's point of view, and I'm sure Stephen, it's one of the apostles. I'm sure Stephen would agree, we don't want to be preaching at people, do we?
No.
We're loving this interaction, you know. So the evening is made up with Stephen's knowledge, and tonight the topic is the elements and spiritualism. Brilliant, brilliant. Stephen will give a short presentation, give you a talk, then there is time for questions and answers. And I was just saying to the lovely lady at the back of the church there is no such thing as a daft question. Because if you've got to ask it, it means you don't know the answer, and that's fine, and it's nobody else's business. Don't sit there and I can't say that, I'll sound thick. We all got to where we are today by asking, so it really isn't interactive. We are streaming out live online for our friends further abroad. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Just for the benefit of people in the church, the whole focus of the camera is upon the platform. It does not include you, the audience. So if you're here when you shouldn't be here, don't worry, your secret is safe with us. And if you're here sat with somebody who shouldn't be sat with, I'll see you later, it will cost you money. Anyway, without further ado,
Thank you.
Stephen, aka Peter.
Peter. Well, welcome everyone. When you come into spiritualism, typically you see a medium giving a message from a loved one in the spirit world. And the knowledge of that loved one is limited by their experience on earth. So we would like them to answer questions that we've got in our head. And when we come into spiritualism, some of our questions are quite obvious. When am I going to die? Am I going to meet the right person? Should I buy or sell my house? And these are normal personal questions we always have, we want answers to. And Spirit don't give us the answers that we want, they give us the answers that we need. They tell us that they love us, that they've survived the change called death, they've arrived safely where they are, and that they've no longer got fear and we shouldn't have it either. And it's a very comforting message, but again, we're only going to be limited by that communicator's knowledge. And Grandma's not going to give us a cure for cancer and answer all of our questions. She's only going to tell us her life story and possibly what she's experienced since she's departed into the spirit realms. But it's not like when you arrive in the spirit world, you get downloaded with all the information of the past. You carry on learning and growing in the spirit world. And that's one of the things we learn. So my grandparents were quite well versed. They read a lot. They were, my grandfathers were in the army and navy. My grandmothers were housewives, but also quite well read, fairly Christian. One was a spiritualist, but I don't know much about that. And there's not much that they taught me about spiritual subjects that I've learned since being in spiritualism. And there's like two oceans of knowledge. There's external and internal. And when we look at the world outside of us, you get to a certain age where you feel like you've understood it to a point of view, and then your world comes crashing down and you have to relearn everything again. And when you're into spiritualism, you start all over again, and you start learning things that really we should learn as children, but it's been kept from us because spiritualism's poo-pooed. And if any other culture says that they commune with their ancestors, you suspend your disbelief and you respect their culture. When they say it in Europe, we get laughed at, and it's a fantasy. But we've got evidence that supports the spiritualist message. And in the early days of spiritualism, it was quite right that it was researched And those researchers were trying to protect the public and make sure that people weren't led astray. Now, those same critics are actually holding back valuable information and knowledge. But even in spiritualism, it took a while to develop a philosophy. And Madame Blavatsky, who was quite a vocal opponent of spiritualism, said in Isis Unveiled that spiritualism will lay in a vegetative state until it has its own philosophy. And a few years later, we got 7 principles given through mediumship and Emma Hardinge Britten, who, funnily enough, was also a member of the Theosophy Society, and she departed company with them because she focused on spiritualism, while Theosophy went deeper into the ancient teachings. And somewhere in between the two, there's a synthesis. And most spiritualists I meet, they study a wide variety of subjects because, again, we only get so much from our communications. A few trance mediums have brought through great teachings from the spirit world through Silver Birch and White Eagle's 2 examples. White Eagle have a series of books on spiritual unfoldment. There's 4 of them. And in the second book, it deals with the elements quite well. It even goes into the names of the elementals. So when it comes to earth, you've got gnomes. When it comes to the water spirits, they're called undines. The air ones are called sylphs, and the fire elements are called salamanders. And until you actually see these, this fairy kingdom for yourself, you sort of hold on to your disbelief, because it seems like something of a bit of a fantasy. But when you look back in our history, people who have seen these realms, and we automatically think they saw leprechauns running around in the bushes, but really people were seeing these beings on a psychic level. And our ability to see on a psychic level seems to have diminished over the years, and it's returning through the work that we're doing. And especially at the birth of modern spiritualism, people started opening up a faculty that lay dormant for maybe thousands of years. When it comes to religious persecution, even in the last few years, the Roman Catholic Church has actually started encouraging people to use their psychic gifts, because they've had to accept the phenomena of Fatima, where some young girls saw the Virgin Mary and gave messages which have been corroborated since, and there's still more to come out. And these girls also talked about the fairy kingdom. When you look back at figures like Joan of Arc, there was the great court case we all know about, but many years before, as a young child, her and her friends had got involved into a problem with the villagers, where they were communicating with the fairy kingdom, and the villagers felt that that would have alienated them from the Catholic Church, so they banned them from doing it. It was quite an interesting anecdote, because I never knew that about Joan of Arc, but it turns out she's been a thorn in the side of the Catholic Church twice, and once was about the elementals. So there's these little occasions in history where it's been recorded that there's an interaction between human beings and a fairy kingdom of elementals. With spiritualism, what we've learned, and when you sit in circle and you open up your faculties, you start to see the aura, you see the auric field, and there are layers to it. There's the sort of physical body, the etheric double, the mental layer, and a spiritual layer. And they become visible as you work with healing and mediumship. Not for everyone, but I noticed after a while, sitting at the back of my church, watching the speaker give a very good address, and this shimmering light above their heads started appearing and going yellow. And the more they got into their philosophy, the more they were in the flow. There it was with my own faculties to see, and until then, I'd been a little bit sceptical about my ability to see it, and I started testing it more and realising that the ancient teachings weren't talking a load of rubbish. They really were these layers, and in spiritualism, enough mediums have confirmed these layers to the aura to know that they are reality. And so we're building up a picture that these layers are associated with different parts of our being. So man has always been divided into 4 folds: the physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual. And they are earth, water, air, and fire. Earth represents your physical life, what you look like, your physical structure, what you eat, how you sleep, where you live, how active you are. It's all these material things. It's how much money you've got in the bank. The water represents the emotions, and emotions are very much like water. Emotion is energy in motion, just like water. It can carry inertia. So when you're walking with a bowl of water and you stop, the water wants to carry on. We all know that emotions are like that as well. When you're biting your tongue, you can feel the energy leaving you, but you're trying to hold it back. The tears as well, fear, anger, these are all emotions running through us. Just like water, they can be a torrent of energy, or they can be calm and still. Then with air, it's representing the mind and mental faculty. And so with all of these elements, you'll get creatures associated with them. Ground-dwelling creatures are symbols for earth, the physical. Water-dwelling creatures are symbols for emotions. And then symbols for the mind are usually winged creatures, such as angels. Eagles especially. But when it comes to fire, that's not represented so much by an animal, because it's talking about willpower. It's talking about the soul and its impetus. In different philosophies, you'll find air above fire above interchangeable. But I look at nature for my answers, and you see solids, liquids and gases, and whether or not something's a solid, liquid or gas depends on the element of heat. So heat is the governor of the other elements, the same way the soul is the governor of your mind, your emotions and your body. It's like a connection. So those 4 elements are used to teach around the world in different ways. If you go to India and you want to learn in the Himalayas all about spiritual wisdom, they're going to teach you about the elements, the same ones you've got here in Poole, or I've got over in Portsmouth, and anywhere in the world, it's the same teaching. So whatever language it is, whatever tradition it is, you'll see the same elements meaning the same things, and they are interchangeable. When it comes to the higher elements above that, the element above fire is ether. And ether is synonymous with space. We look out and we just see this dark vacuum, when really it's a fluid of some superphysical source. Ether is the world of energy that we move through. Above ether is the realm of Akasha, and Akasha is synonymous with the cloud. It's where information is stored in some mysterious invisible data bank that we can access and take little packets of information and downloads from. And that is something you enter in meditation, but it's also how through mediumship this information is coming through. So we're up to the 5th level with ether, 6th level is Akasha, synonymous with karma, and then above that is 7th heaven, as it were. That's our connection with spirit, connection with God. And although you can make elements above that, it's a bit beyond the human comprehension, and we've yet to really master the 5th and 6th levels of our existence, which are ether and karma. When we get our information from the spirit world, we know that it's coming through this series of elements. It's coming from the realms of spirit, through the ether, through our will, our mind, our emotions, and our bodies. And one thing you learn, especially about spiritual work, is the mind and the body are connected, but via the emotions. The emotions are like a conduit that energy travels through. If you've got emotional blockages, it will interfere the link between your mind and your body. So through spiritual work, you learn to gain an emotional intelligence. And through spirit communication, the one thing you learn is that we go on, we don't die. Something happens to your fear of death. It diminishes and it sometimes even disappears. And that changes you completely. There was a gentleman called Andre Celsius he was a scientist, and he wanted to figure out a scale for measuring the universe, but judging it on water. So he used mercury in a glass vial, and he figured out the point at which water froze, and he marked that and he called that 0. He then measured the point at which water boiled over, and he marked that 100, and we get the centigrade scale from that. So now if we look at our emotions as water, we can take that scale and use it for our inner universe. We know at what point we freeze with fear, and we know at what point we boil over with anger. And you see, through spiritual development, through the knowledge of spiritualism, people's fears become a lot less, and their ability to deal with people becomes greater. So you can take that scale and actually internalize it, and especially as children, adolescents and young people, learning that is very, very vital, because on reflection I've been lucky, but I've seen myself and others suffer because we've lost our cool, or we've been too scared of something. And you can get over a lot of fears as well as anger. If you've got a fear of heights, a healthy fear of heights, and you want to be a roofer, you have to climb a ladder a few times, get used to scaffolding, and after about 6 weeks it's second nature to you, and you're climbing up and down it like a monkey, and you're quite comfortable at that height. But if your phobia is such that you can't get over that, well, just work at the ground, it's no great deal. But at least you're trying to work on your fears and your shortcomings. And when it comes to the idea of water, especially for children, it's an experiment that they can do themselves. If you take salt and you add it to water, it fortifies it. That's why we put salt on the roads in winter time. And it means that it doesn't freeze so easily. It also means that the water doesn't boil so easily. That's why we put it in so early in our cooking. Because when we cooked over fires, we didn't have such control over the heat. So putting more salt in the water meant you could cook at higher temperatures for longer without boiling it all over. Nowadays we've got technology that makes that a lot easier, but it was well known back in the day. So when it comes to our internal universe, first of all, we need salt in our diet because they make up our hormones, and they help us regulate our body. But what is the spiritual salt that helps to fortify our emotions? And that is that spiritual work. It's about consistency. You go to the gym one day, you're not going to expect to see results, but if you're consistent with it, you look back and you really see the amount of growth that you've had. And you notice that because of this internal scale that you've now got. Now, when it comes to elements in the physical sense, we all know about the periodic table of elements. They arrange themselves in density. The more solid, dense at the bottom, the more refined, least dense at the top. And it's the same with the elements as I've got them here. And I'm using these images, they're called the Platonic solids, and they come from Plato's school. It's sacred geometry. Earth is represented by a cube, and if you look at the heaviest elements on the periodic table, especially carbon, graphite, these sort of structures, you'll see a very cubic structure. Then if you look at the more fluid elements, watery, if you have ever poured water at the right sort of angle out of a can, you can almost see this lattice work, this herringbone shape to it that it does quite naturally. And that corresponds very much with the icosahedron. You get that lattice work. Then when it comes to air, we've got the octahedron, and it's a pyramid pointing up and a pyramid pointing down. Air rises and it falls. So and you look at the structure of a lot of gaseous elements, and it's loosely but more or less in line with the octahedron. And then the tetrahedron of fire, it resembles a flame pointing up. It's four-sided triangles pointing up, and it's a symbol of fire. And when you look at them, they demonstrate a knowledge of the molecular structure of these elements that Plato shouldn't have known because he didn't have a microscope. So how did he know? How did they know that these elements corresponded to these shapes all those thousands of years ago? Well, it's quite simple. They used the microscope of the mind, which is meditation, repeatedly. You don't just get a revelation like that. It takes someone like Plato to do all the study and study mathematics, geometry, and then go inwards and actually correspond them to the elements. This work wasn't just the Greeks, it was also the Egyptians. They did this kind of work, and they had different words and names for it, but they worked with a series of elements to do with the gods that they had. And I'll explain it quickly with an image. I won't bore you too long with it. So, what the Egyptians had, wrong way around. was at dawn in the morning in springtime was Horus, and it represented new life, vitality in the element of air. And at 6 in the morning at the spring equinox, they would do a ritual towards Horus, but they were acknowledging the powers behind the element of air involved in spring. In summer, at midday on the solstice, it was Ra, representing fire, the sun exalting at its highest, most potent. And then in autumn, they'd represent water with Set or Seti, and the element of change. The rains will come after the summer, and the first floods will come. And the symbol of water would be honoured at that time of day or year. And then at midnight, in the middle of winter, the element of earth is represented by Osiris, Lord of the Underworld. So Osiris has always got green colour to him because he's representing the element of earth, fertility and farming. In the Christian tradition and in the sort of Golden Dawn tradition, these are now replaced with Raphael, Michael, Gabriel and Uriel. And at the centre of the pyramid, the Archangel Metatron. So even though spiritualism, we do believe in the angelic realms, we don't really have a teaching that synthesises it such a way as with the elements. But I don't know a medium, a circle leader that doesn't know all this and bring them into meditations. So that meditation goes back as far as the builders of the pyramids in Egypt, and it's still how we work today in circle, because this knowledge is sort of, it transcends time and civilizations, and it's in harmony with the spirit teachings, and I find no argument when I use it in circle to connect with the spirit world. They seem to enjoy joining us in the meditations. And the story behind this is quite a great place to start to learn a lot of ancient teachings, because all the Egyptians were concerned with was the journey of the soul through this life and hereafter. I don't think they even argued over reincarnation, they just knew it was a fact. They didn't argue over the afterlife, they just knew it was a fact. And they cared very much about what happened to the body before and after death. And they learnt a lot about what the body was made out of, these solids, liquids and gases, and they gave them different names. And they worshipped different gods accordingly. So, but again with spiritualism, when we do our studies, we mostly come across astrology and the Kabbalah and other philosophies. And it's all about energy working. And with the elements, they crop up in astrology, but they've also got another element of every element is either cardinal, fixed or mutable. And this is about how energy works and flows. And the best, most down-to-earth example I can use is a hose pipe. You can transfer this to electricity and other forms of energy, but we've all used a hose pipe, and it's an easy example to use. First of all, the cardinal energy is the tap that you're tapping into. What source are you tapping into? Is it an unlimited, pure source of divine healing, or are you just asking your spirit guide to help you? You know, sometimes we've actually got to go think about what we're tapping into, because some things are limited and some things are unlimited. And if you're tapping into unlimited universal consciousness, you're not the healer, you're just channeling that healing energy, much like the hose pipe. So the hose pipe needs to be fit for purpose. It needs to be, it doesn't need any kinks or knots in it or any holes. So as a channel for spirit, you want to make sure that you're prepared for it. I hear so many people come into the movement and within 6 months their life's falling apart and they don't know why. And then you go, well, what was your job? I was an enforcement officer for the... I was like, that might not be very spiritual. I hope you're doing your job spiritually, you know. And you might need to reflect on your life, and really, if you're prepared to start the work, have you got the time? Is it going to negatively affect your life? And if you can't prepare yourself to channel the energies, you're not going to receive the energies to channel. You're only going to be limited by your experience and your capabilities. So you, as the hose pipe, you're just that. You're the channel for energy, but it's important that you are as good a channel as possible. And that's your fixed energy. Then the mutable energy it depends on how you use it. So you could use it for healing, you could use it for card reading, for platform mediumship. The energy is the same, but it's mutable as to how you do it. So we all know with garden hose, we open the tap up, and a few seconds later, it's coming out the other end. And if you can depend on how it's used, either it gushes out all in one place, or we can have a fine mist. It depends on what you're using it for. All energy is the same. If it's electricity, this is volts, amps, and watts, and it's exactly the same. And when it comes to the mind, it's input, process, output, cardinal, fixed, and mutable. And I'll give a good example. My mentors at Portsmouth Temple, there's a family of 3, mum, dad, and their son, and they are all fire signs: Aries, Leo, and Sagittarius. So they're going on holiday. The son, who's Aries, as soon as they mention the word holiday, his cardinal force has got him on the laptop, and he's got 5 holidays up already within 5 minutes. He goes, right, where are we going? The father, who's a Leo, goes, we're going to Sandy Balls. We always go to Sandy Balls. We're going to Sandy Balls. And then the mum, who's Sagittarius, is mutable. She says, I don't care where we go as long as I don't do all the driving. You know, and that sums up very unique, how subtle the difference can be, but very real in personality types. And so when we study these in harmony with spiritualism, it confirms, that there is this greater world of knowledge that we can synthesize with our spiritual work. Our grandmas aren't going to give us all the answers to this, so we have to go out and do workshops, read books, and then also go within and confirm what you're learning. Go into the inner worlds and see the worlds outside of you manifest in the world inside you, because the universe is equally as infinite internally as it is externally. But we just try to use our eyes to see what's around us. Looking inside can be quite daunting at first. But in our external world, we've got a microscope that can see down to the subatomic levels, and we've got a telescope that can see all the way into the edge of a black hole. So we can equally investigate our internal universe, and there are these systems that can help us. And you might be quite surprised at what you find when you start exploring that way. But that's not the only point where I can relate spiritualism to the elements, because, like I say, all of our mediumship works the same way. It's from spirit, through our mind, our emotions, and our body. You link with someone in the spirit world, initially you get a feeling. For me, I have to feel that family relationship, because that's a link of love. But it's a feeling, it's an emotion. Then I start to see the physical presence of the person. And funnily enough, the spirit world can show us at any age of their life. But they will show you a physical appearance. They might show you what car they drove, or their garden, something physical. They might show you at what point their mind was like. Some people have great minds, and some people are very simple, and they like to keep it simple. So that's another element, the element of air that you bring into your readings. And you can also work out how spiritual they were. Some people are not very spiritual, and they're quite surprised that they're in the spirit world, and others find it very easy because they were very spiritually minded all their lives. So that's another element through mediumship, that you can link with someone at that level. There also, I might mention the 7 principles. They were given, and it's a good example of the elements. They were given through mediumship, which is fire. They were given through the mind of the medium, which is air, through the movement of spiritualism, and each church that has a set of 7 principles is grounding that energy into the earth. Without our churches, for the principles to be applied to, they don't get past the water stage of the movement. It needs us to ground the energies and complete the circuit. And that's very important. That's where, but that's about the only point my sort of family in the spirit world sort of engage with me on this, because they're learning themselves. And they go, yes, that's exactly right. We need to live by those principles, otherwise we're not grounding that energy. And time and time again, these elements come up in different ways, but we're supposed to learn them at school. So when Plato's talking about the elements, he was teaching elementary school. Then you go to grammar school and you learn the liberal arts. But those elements were taught to us as kids in the form of shapes. He got green cubes and yellow triangles to fit into these little boxes. But no one actually explains to you the correspondence to your fourfold inner being. And if you did at such a young age, by the time you left elementary school, you've got a knowledge of yourself that I'm only just catching up on in my 30s and 40s, if I'd known back then. But I watched TV and a few sort of kids' cartoons and look back at the ones that I had as a kid. And you've got these 4 Ninja Turtles, each one representing one of the elements. The Teletubbies, the 4 colours for elements. The PlayStation control pad has the 4 elements esoterically embedded in it. Whether that's someone intended that or not, these elements are being taught to our children, either knowingly or unknowingly, through all these different forms of media. And at first you're probably a bit apprehensive, what is it they're actually learning? But on reflection, some of the storylines in these cartoons actually were very spiritual lessons. They used to be more moral anyway. Right at the end of the cartoon they go, right kids, what did you learn from today? And it was quite interesting that I actually got an education by default from these cartoons. And so I always look at what kids are watching now, and I don't like spending too long in front of the TV, but it was quite interesting to see that all these new shows are still teaching the same things, either vicariously or overtly. So one of the things I wanted to finish with, again, was going back to the ancient teachings. They've kind of been hidden away in secret for many years, and then in the last 100 years or so, through these societies like the Golden Dawn, Theosophy, Spiritualism, these words are coming back into our common usage, and the religious apprehension to them has diminished quite considerably. And if you were to talk to a Christian priest and talk about the archangels representing the elements, I'm sure that would open up a dialogue between the priest and their parishioners that probably wasn't allowed so many years ago. And I know that the local vicar in my partner's village, he seems a really nice guy, and I'd love to talk to him about it, but I don't want to put him off talking to me, because I can go on forever about these things. Now, again, going back to the philosophy of spiritualism, the White Eagle Lodge is not really spiritualism, but the information that was given was in a very similar fashion, trance mediumship at its best. And if you go and read the Spiritual Unfoldment series, it's a very good down-to-earth way of introducing it, not only to children, but to those adults who hadn't learnt this before, because it's in language that suits everybody. If you go to the Far East and you go to learn these traditions, you have to first of all learn a new language, spend time in the land to learn. And really you can teach your child these looking out of your garden window and putting some ice cubes in the tray to show them what happens to water and what can happen to them if they use their spiritual life to help get some emotional intelligence. Without trying to sort of maybe poke at some mediums and spiritualists, we get so drawn into this and full of the energy, and we just want to get moving. But the old traditions that take us through a guided series of unfoldment are fantastic. Learning the elements, you know, we say we teach them to children, but with all circle work, you do it again and then again and again. Every time a medium goes on the platform, they're starting from scratch again. I actually believe I have to remind myself how to drive every time I get in a car. I just do it quicker every time than I did the first time. But there's that sort of apprehension every time you go back over learning these things. You start at the beginning again and you see it in a new light. There is no sort of finish line with the elements. Every time you talk about them, something new will pop into your mind. Just these 4 basic, simple words can be used to study again and again and again. Like I was talking about the power animals being either earth, water, air, fire. That when you do your meditations, sometimes that fleeting image that you have, you can unpack that for a whole month. It could just be, like I said, the image of an eagle. and you don't know what that means, and you find out it's about air, it's about the mind. But more than that, that eagle has one single focus. If you've got a lot going on in your life, that eagle is telling you to focus on one thing. And but one of the most useful images that I get from this version of shamanism is the frog, because the frog dwells in water, but only calm water, and it can hop off water onto land and back and forth. And I found when I'm working with someone that has got very difficult emotions going on and they really need to ground it and they're finding it very difficult, the image of a frog pops into my mind. And I know that person has been given that image because they're finding a bit of emotional stability. That's where spiritualism comes in. Like I said, the knowledge that you are an eternal being, that does something to your fear of death that changes you completely. And that, again, it's because the spirit is the governor of the other elements. Fire is the governor of the mind, the emotions, and the body. If you can bring your inspiration from the spirit world, you can't go far wrong. When you're only reaching to the level of your own mind, that's where you can look over some of your emotional blockages. We lie to ourselves. We've all got them, and we have to constantly work on them. But when we've got our emotions balanced, the mind and the body are in perfect connection, and that's where healing takes place. Whenever I've worked as a healer, the first thing I see is the image of calm water. I don't put it there myself, I'm being given it because that's where you start in healing, getting those emotions balanced. And I find it so awkward the minute I put my hands on someone and they burst into tears, but they need to just release some of those emotions, and once they're released, that healing energy flows. And it's the same with mediumship. If you've got a problem on your mind, you can overcome that. But if you've got an emotional problem, it's going to be much harder to give that message and to receive what you receive from the spirit world. So it's probably, water is so abundant, it's the most important element in our external life, and it also happens to be the most important element in our internal life. When I connect with the spirit world, it's through that emotion that we call love. And the emotion's only the reflection of love, it's not love itself. But that emotion is so important because without it, I'm not happy to work until I feel that connection, that relationship. Whether it's an uncle, an auntie, a cousin, and not having a very big family myself, it took me a while to build up that repertoire of feelings and emotions. Now I know what an auntie feels like. I don't know how an auntie would feel like any other way than through mediumship. That love, once you feel it, you can't unfeel it. It gives you another view on life. So to allow a spirit person to share with you their emotions in that way and to be used at an emotional level, it's one of the reasons why I think mediums keep coming back to do the work, because it gives you something you can't quite put into words. So if you were to take home anything from a story about the elements, it's about the element of water, the emotional stability you need, not just in life, but especially if you're going to do some sort of spiritual work. So at that point, if anyone's got any questions or they want me to go over something, it would be a very good opportunity.
Hands up whose brain is melting. Just a side comment where you touch on elementals and angels. I've been there.
Yeah.
We have this generic, don't we, image of an angel as big fluffy thing with wings and all wonderful,
Yeah.
and elementals as pixies and gnomes. But when you touch on them, this is my experience, on an energetic level, it's really not.
No.
Really not what you get.
Again, I can only go back to the ancient Egyptians, who were anatomists. And we have the image of the caduceus, which is this pole with two serpents round it and wings spread out. Without being too graphic, but there's no other way of doing it, they used to cut the body open and lay everything out on the floor. And the spinal column, which has these nerves running around it both ways, you know, you've got it's both the nervous system and the arterial system. The nervous system is the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, and the arterial system is the tree of life. You know, these have a correspondence in our physical body. And then you've got the left hemisphere of the brain and the right hemisphere of the brain. And this might make you feel a bit sick, but if you lay them out on the floor, they look like wings with that pole. So it's quite graphic, but that is where this idea of the mind being a winged creature in association with the air. So angels, when you look in the Bible and they describe angels, they look nothing like these beautiful Adonises with wings. They are, you know, what's it like? There's several different types, but they're like ring after ring with eyes and wings coming out of all sorts of places. And when I've done my own psychical journeys into seeing what an angel is, I can't really describe what I saw. All I know is it made me stop the meditation there and open my eyes, because all I saw was fire, and it was a bit overwhelming. So, you know, when we are teaching these things to children, we might want to put them into a much more palatable form. But as adults, we have to actually investigate these things for ourselves. And I've never seen a winged creature come down and pat me on the head. It's always been quite, I'll just see a light around a higher being and not much more else. The wings, at first I was looking to see, why can't I see these wings? It's because my faculties aren't good enough. It's only because that's more of a palatable, mainstream version of angelic forces. They really are an energy, and you only feel them, and they can be extremely overwhelming. But I think that's why having this knowledge, it makes you more prepared to tune into those elemental forces. You know, the 7 colours are split into 7 rays, and there's supposed to be an archangel for each ray. And when you do work like this, you come across these guides and temples. You know, especially if you study the Kabbalah, it's very specific about temples and guides. And each one will guide you through the elements as well. You know, in the Jewish tradition, earth, water, air and fire, they're just, air and fire are swapped over because they put the mind above the will. You know, that's up to you how you do it, because I feel that the will can overcome the mind, but I also know how the mind can overcome the will through breaking of bad habits, for instance. You know, smoking, I can't seem to give it up because my willpower to smoke is greater than my mental knowledge to stop smoking.
Yeah, join the club.
Yes.
Where would you place dragons?
Dragons. Well, that's a difficult one. Well, first of all, people have got a living memory of dragons, and we find dinosaurs buried. Maybe humans have been around longer than we're told. But the other form of dragons, and when I've been dowsing, and there's the Sun and the Serpent, a book and a documentary by Hamish Miller, and he went around dowsing the Michael line running across the country. So I went to Glastonbury with a pair of dowsing rods, and I went to the same spots and doused for the energy. By the time I got to Glastonbury Tor and I got to the top, I realised why they call it the Dragon Line. And you know, the Chinese New Year, they got the dragon dancing in the street. That's how it felt. And when I got to the top of the Tor, not that I'm that scared of heights, but I had to get and sit down on the ground because I had vertigo, and that's because the energy, the Earth's energy grid, I'd been in tune with it for about 45 minutes and needed a break. And that, as far as I can tell, is the dragon energy that we're talking about. And I was visualising do you remember the Never-Ending Story? You got the luck dragon. That's what I was getting when I was doing that, and it was quite powerful. I don't know if I could do it as often as I have here for very long, but other than that, I don't. You know, there's the Draco in the star system and astrology, and that brings into a lot of spiritual disciplines. But you know, as for the idea that we've got dragons, there's a part of South Africa called the Drakensberg, and the locals there swear blind they still see the dragon. And I've never known those people to lie to me when I was living there about anything else, so you know, I suspend my disbelief.
Do you think there's an element there that nowadays people tend to over-romanticize some of these images and not actually investigate in an intelligent way?
Well, especially some of them being, what's coming to mind are tattoos. And this one guy, he had all these Chinese dragon tattoos on him, and he's wondering why his spiritual nature's sort of fading away a bit. And I wonder, it's like, you know, what does that, you know, it might be protection, but from what? Do you know what I mean? It's quite interesting how people change, circumstances change people, but I don't know how much that tattoo might have affected him. You know, and it's quite a potent image. It doesn't. It looks like a gargoyle dragon type image, and I can only say that it hasn't exactly benefited him. Yes.
Do you feel, like Laura's just said about romanticised images of different types, dragons, angels, and this type of thing? It's because there is a background fear of power, because really we're talking about energy and power in all its different forms, aren't we? And to be able to accept them, perhaps humanity's consciousness is at that level where it needs to water it down a lot.
Yeah, I mean,
fluffy and
as much as we also want to be safe doing the work, you also have to punch above your weight to get anywhere.
Yeah.
And it's totally forgivable to ask the big questions and try and connect straight to the top. And at the end of the day, I strongly believe, especially through spiritualism, that every time I'll come onto a platform, as much as I'm begging my guides to support me, I'm asking God. And my guides are working for God, and so we work well together. I'm not worshipping my guides as such. We're both looking towards that one God for permission to work, basically, and to guide us through the series of events. And when you hear about people that don't do that, Ouija boards, a few drinks in the pub, oh, should we get the Ouija board out? No medium, no prayer, and it's a disaster. And I've heard that so many times that it must be a genuine phenomenon. Luckily, it's not happened to me, but I can't say it doesn't exist. So we do have to be a little bit careful. Not everything in this world or the spirit world's our friend, and you have to have as much discernment in your physical external life as you do, probably more so in your internal life. And I mean, the world now is suffering with a mental health crisis in our country especially, and all around the world. COVID hasn't helped much because it's thrown people out of what was their natural pattern and order before. That's another reason why spiritual knowledge like this, it stays the same through countless civilizations, because it's true and it's really simple. We can overcomplicate things. They've been simplified very nicely for us. Sometimes it feels that we've been lied to when it's too esoteric. You know, you've got these paintings depicting, you know, movements in the stars and the sort of future and history of man, but it just looks like a scene that otherwise, if it's not interpreted to you properly, you wouldn't understand it. And that's why I think, you know, our priests and clergy in the Church of England and in the Catholic Church, if they could get up and use the wisdom that they've got and explain it quite simply at the basic level like that, and take some of the mystery out of it, we'd see a much more harmonious link between Christianity and other faiths, and especially, you know, spiritualism, where we are encouraged to use our psychic faculties. And like I say, the Christian church is far more open to it now than it was. You know, and maybe we'll have a return to elemental, not so much worship, but the old superstition, like throwing salt over your shoulder. That's a good example with emotional intelligence. Fairies, they used to, we do it with our children, the tooth fairy, leaving 50p out. Well, I think it's £2 now. Some kids get a fiver per tooth. But it's, we still do these things. And when we do them, I mean, Santa Claus, it's a really good one. If aliens turned up and we said to them there's no such thing as Santa Claus, they'd be like, actually, there's more evidence for Santa Claus than there is for a lot of stuff on your planet. Do you know what I mean? It's we've built up this wonderful thought form, as it were, and although there are negative sides to it, there's positive as well. And it's a time of year, especially when the world of elementals, you know, we're bringing in the holly and the ivy, the only greenery other than the fir tree. So we bring them into the home, and we're really working with the element of earth at the festivities that time of year. And the lighting of a candle at midnight to bring that light back into the world, this is all elemental alchemy, as it were. And I mean, we can talk about the elements as alchemy. That's like the next stage. So alchemy is about reducing all the material matter down and separating the spirit. You know, winemaking goes into making brandy because you're removing all that material matter, removing all the water content, and what you're left with is the pure spirit at the end. So alchemy is about doing that, finding that spark of the God force inside you once you've stripped away all the other elements. And if you want to study alchemy, Isaac Newton did a translation of the Emerald Tablets, and it's a beautiful poem, but it's talking about, you know, how you do basically that. You strip away at the gross to release the finer matter. And when it comes to spiritualism, that's what we're doing. We're releasing our material attachments, and we're working on our spiritual selves, so that eventually when we move on to the spirit world, there's no need to come back and repeat this process.
Suddenly that makes sense now when you talk about alchemy.
Yeah.
Because that was always reducing the base metals to gold. So symbolically we are working through those elements to get that purest and most refined element.
Yeah, and it's hard work, that's why we've got to do it over and over again. Yeah.
Also, touching on where before the church got such a foothold, where people would work with the elements or call in the directions and this type of thing, they were working with the energy, weren't they?
Yeah, yeah.
And I feel that then there was a greater connectedness and knowing within, but maybe not in such a conscious way.
Well,
do we need to introduce that more now so that people start to feel that connectedness with everything that is? It's not just, oh, that's over there in the east and the west over there.
Yeah.
There's a connection with life.
Well, I mean, that's a bit of a controversial, because there's a point where they merge,
Yeah.
and you know, even though the wording hasn't changed much, it's the same philosophy. But when you watch the mass begin, and there is smudging taking place, just like we would do in our homes with some Palo Santo or some sage, we're seeing incense being burned in the churches to clear the space before they work. And if you study Golden Dawn magic or Wicca, you see the pentagram, and the pentagram has water and fire on the right hand side and air and earth on the left hand side. So fire and water are emotion, it's willpower, and that is very much what we work in spiritualism. It's of love, emotional connections. When it comes to air and earth, that's the left hand path, which is mind over matter. So most magic is about using your mind to create dominance over matter, to try and make things work out the way you want them to. Whereas the right hand path is more about love and devotion, it's more passive and opening ourselves up to spirit more. And on the pentagram, it's used to banish and invoke these energies in ritual. I don't think there's a need to do that. I thought there was. I've practiced magic. I'm not a massive fan of doing it, because I have to remember being a spiritualist is very useful to other people. Magic, the only thing you can ever change with magic is yourself. But with spiritualism, it's an opportunity guided by higher beings to give the right message to the right person when they need it most. And if you miss the mark 100 times, if you hit it once, that's worth it, you know.
Yeah, because I feel that if you're using magic where you're wanting to use it for your own power and your own energy and your own ego, if you like, that's going a different way.
Yeah.
But working with the energies and allowing the flow and the process and being part of that.
I'd say
Different, and maybe it's what people may need to be encouraged to understand a little bit more, like you're talking about in the church with the incense and the smudging, if you like. So that it dissolves the fear that's been brought over, because there's still fear that hangs over some of the symbols.
Oh yeah, yeah. It's like anything. It's like a car. It's neutral. It depends on the driver,
Absolutely.
the pilot. And so magic isn't something we do. Magic when we're working in spiritualism by default. We open in prayer. We close in prayer. That's we're casting spells as we speak, you know. But we're doing it in a very down to earth and loving way. And we're also giving over the authority to a higher power, rather than asking for that higher power to do our bidding. You know, the difference is subtle, but it means a lot to its usage. You know, spiritualism, for all the criticism laid at us, where's the harm in spiritualism? There's none. You can find maybe some newspaper cuttings where someone's behaved poorly, but generally, if the devil's using spiritualism, he's doing a pretty bad job with it. You know, we're not doing anywhere near the harm that people probably make out. No. Whereas magic, I can easily say that's true. You know, there's good and bad in it, but spiritualism, it's only useful really. It's that connection with family, just showing that it hasn't gone anywhere, and then it's left up to us to the search for knowledge ourselves, both inwardly and outwardly.
It's like a heart and soul connection, isn't it? Whereas the other side is more mind and ego.
Yeah.
The other thing with spiritualism, the main tenet is service.
Yeah.
If you look at everything we do for our evidential mediumship, it's of service to the spirit world and to the sitter. We give healing, that is of service, and all the other faculties, they all boil down to the service aspect, the helping each other.
And that's why I think healing especially is the backbone of it, because it's where the energy is flowing most uninterrupted when it's done right. Because you're not giving a message, you're not worried about someone saying, no, I can't take that. You're just in the flow and you're allowing that to flow. And really, because you're channeling, you're coming from an unlimited source of pure energy, you should feel fantastic afterwards rather than depleted. If you feel depleted, you're probably giving a lot of your own energy, which at the end of the day, though we say that's not a good thing to do, we're empaths and we want to see people healed, and you know, you put your own heart and soul into it sometimes, and you get disappointed when it doesn't work out the way you want it to, but you can't choose someone else's life path for them. It's theirs to live, and if healing's working, then you can thank the spirit world for allowing it to happen, and if it doesn't, don't blame yourself because you're just the channel. That's all right.
There's a book, William Misley, have you read that, with the gnome sills and gnomes and mermaids, is it?
Undines.
Undines,
Yeah.
That's
And the
quite
sylphs.
interesting in the way that they go into the form or the essence of the being of the sylph.
Yeah.
And how expansive and huge it is.
Well, there have been a few mornings where I'm watching, controversial issue, I'm watching these odd little clouds being formed in the sky behind planes that seem to hang around for a few hours, and every now and then I'll just see some invisible bit of air come and break them all up and disappear, and it makes me wonder, and I'll get a lovely feeling when I see that. And in the water as well, I mean, I was a water baby as a kid, I was in it all the time and loved it, but I always had this horrible feeling I was being watched, and you know, it didn't matter if I was in the shallow end of a swimming pool, I always felt like there was something underneath me. And maybe it was, as a kid, a bit of a fantasy, but looking back, it's just that tuning into the elements that are there. You're never alone as a spiritualist, really, are you? You've got your loved ones around you, but you become aware of this greater world. At the end of the day, it's not in another location. We are in the spirit world, we are in the astral realms, and we're just limited by our external eyesight as to how far we can see, and we can do so much more.
It's just a case of switching frequency and getting faster.
Yeah. The only other times I've heard personal experiences with elementals, it's when someone has misbehaved with them. And a very extreme example, about the same age as me, about 10 years ago, he's disappeared off the scene now. But he would stay up all night, and I think it was more than just Red Bull he was taking, and he'd be giving readings to people on Facebook to get some experience. And one morning he phoned me up at work and said, can you come round? I've got these things jumping off my walls and they're not leaving me alone. And I was like, mate, I'm busy, I really can't. I know there's nothing I can do. And I think it was an episode brought about by misusing what he was doing and you know, I don't see it very often. He was quite an extreme case, but I think if there's ever an experience I can look back on, not to mess around with spiritual work. Otherwise the elementals stay out of our way. You know, we're only going to see them when we've crossed them one way or another or overstepped our boundaries. But again, in the I think in the White Eagle books actually gives locations around the British Isles where they're still abundant, especially down in the West Country and Highlands of Scotland. But it does seem that they have kind of stepped away from human beings and not crossing paths with us so much.
I wonder why.
Yeah.
I feel it's a case of sometimes it might be to believe before you see, because and paying attention. And when we think we've seen a quick flash or something or other, it's more
Yeah.
than we think it is. Because I see images in the clouds sometimes, and maybe you're projecting an image in the cloud, but maybe sometimes there's more than that. Like
Yeah. I
in
mean,
the
you
clouds,
see some
sort of
photographs of clouds, not just the alien ones, but
Yeah.
you see some very interesting, it's the timing as well. People seeing these images in the cloud at certain events is quite pertinent, really. But
certain trees and things as well.
Arthur Conan Doyle, he's president of the Spiritualist National Union, the writer of Sherlock Holmes, and a devout spiritualist, one of the greatest voices for spiritualism we've ever had. But he made a very big error when it came to the photographs of fairies. I can't remember the exact case, it's quite famous. And he believed in divine providence, and he believed that we were on the cusp of spiritualism being universally accepted worldwide. And then these girls produced these photographs of fairies at the bottom of their garden, and he was adamant this was the divine providence he was waiting for. When Kodak had sent back, they'd studied the image and said as far as they could tell, the image hadn't been tampered with or reproduced. It was an actual photo, but they couldn't say how it was made, and still left it open to, fraud. It turned out these girls had produced the image knowing that this wasn't the fairy kingdom, it was something they produced themselves. And he had egg on his face after that massively. And whether he regrets it or not, I'm sure towards the end of his life there's a wonderful interview you can see on YouTube, and he talks about how he's seen the best, the worst and the most indifferent mediums. He's probably the best judge of mediumship alive at that time, and despite his disappointments, he was still adamant the spirit realm was a reality. He might have got the elementals, at least that incident, a bit wrong. But that's all that the media focus on when it comes to spiritualism. Oh look, the nutcase believed in fairies. And it kind of diminishes what we do, because we can't prove it. With evidential mediumship, we say prove it. When it comes to these other wider aspects, it's quite hard to prove.
It is, but when other people connect with like dryads and different beings like that, there must be something in it, and you get like Lenny Kindred who would write about the different trees and the different energies and the dryads.
Well, I also, going more into a mystical and magical side, these are things that there's whole generations of knowledge passed down, and I feel with a lot of people, they need to blend with their lineage, as it were. Of the Western tradition of esotericism and druidry, so me studying that, I find I connect better and see better. If I'm trying to do the Hindu and Buddhist versions, not so much, because it's not my lineage, as it were. Some people warm to it a lot easier. We don't know what our reincarnation history is. We come to this world with a certain set of skills, and finding the path for you that of least resistance, as it were. So trying to learn it in the language that I speak is a really big help, instead of having to translate and get a new glossary. When you study theosophy, it goes very heavily into Tibetan Buddhism, and you have to then acquaint yourself with all these words that they mean something in English, so I might as well just know the English version of it. If you go to India and say karma, and you keep repeating the word karma, they'll probably think there's a film crew, because you're just saying action, action, action. It's only when they've translated it to another people, first the Greeks and then the Europeans, that they actually had to get their philosophy into one word that we'd understand, so they used the word karma. To them it just means action, to us it means spiritual retribution. So it's quite handy that we do have such a simple background to study, rather than complicate it with too much from other realms, you know.
Matt?
See, I just wondered what your thoughts were. You were talking about energy and how energy, you can be drained of your energy and different types of energy. I just wondered what you thought about protecting your energy.
Well, I mean, again, so as a spiritualist, I don't really do much unless I've opened in prayer. And again, it's about like the host pipe. You're preparing every session, making sure that what you're tapping into is a spiritual source and not just a mental source, and that you are healthy and fit for purpose, you know. And I love spiritualism for all the unique little nuances. But my favourite was when I started training as a healer, and we had to go to review days to make sure everyone's up to date with their coursework and the laws. It gets to the first tea break, and you see 25 healers all rush to the door and get their cigarettes out and chain smoke. You know, so we've all got problems, and we're not all 100%.
You're saying that like it's a bad thing.
Yeah, but this is the thing. It's as long as you're fit enough and healthy enough, you know, your spiritual body's doing the work. And I mean, with mediumship, in the old days, they used to like to have a drink to calm the nerves. And they'd be pretty sloshed, but they'd get up on the platform and they'd be sober as a judge, give a wonderful demonstration, come off the platform and be sloshed again. So it's not good advice, but you know, doing this work when you've got that connection with the spirit world, you know, although you don't want to be too rigid, oh, I've got to be the perfect channel, at least you're trying, you're there or thereabouts. And the great thing about spiritualism, even though there's examples where people have misused it, I'm a firm believer that A, you can fake it till you make it, and I hate saying that, but B, you learn as you go, and you are brought to the right way of thinking. If you enter spiritualism for selfish intentions, I believe the spirit world can take those people, turn them into wonderful servants, because when, like I say, when you've got that feeling of a grandmother, and she's got a very important message to someone whose life is changed by that very simple message, that means everything, you know, it keeps you coming back.
I think it's fair to say when you come into spiritualism or spirituality or any good faith system, you change. It's like going into a partnership. When we get married, we change. Because you've got to adapt and adhere to where you are and where you're working. I'm speaking to a lot of spiritualists and myself, and we all say we are totally different people now than when we started down this path. So when you're talking about protection, I'm always a very big one about bringing it back to self. I am responsible for my energy. I am responsible for my own moral hygiene, putting it in old language. You know, if I go in to do healing and I'm stood there thinking, oh, I want to go down to the pub and go, oh, it's a really good night down there, I'm going to get hammered tonight, and if I'm lucky I'm going to pull. Well, do you know what? That is the energy in which I'm transmitting. And you wouldn't do that. Would you? Thank you. Right, we can all trust Ted, that's why.
But I think it's...
but it's that, you know, it's that self-discipline. Because we've got to remember, I think, as spiritualists, not only are we here to be of service, but we're also here on a journey. And this is a conversation I've been having with a lot of mediums over the last few months. It's all right, give all the time, but what about your journey? What about where you're going? You know, don't be so keen to go, yes.
Talk about faculties and how you develop them in circle. Thing is, if you go into circle without worrying about the faculties are a byproduct of spiritual growth. They're not spiritual growth of themselves. Being able to see the spirit world is not a medal that you've passed a certain point, because some people feel, some people hear, some people see, and it depends on the person's personality and character. But it's your spiritual growth first and foremost, and that's in the things that no one sees you do, and that you never tell anyone about. It's the things only God knows, and those are the things that open your faculties up because you deserve them, and not because it's just because you can. You know, we don't come to this earth with the ability to see, hear, feel, taste and touch based on our personal being. You know, plenty of criminals can see and touch and feel in prison. They don't lose those faculties because they've done something wrong. So just because you've done something wrong doesn't mean you're going to lose your mediumship. It might make a difference to who's willing to work with you in the spirit world, but they don't judge. I'm sure we all know sort of certain mediums who might be more egotistical than others. The spirit world don't care. They need to get their message to their granddaughter. They're going to get it through whoever's there at the time. And I remember Sue saying to me before I went out onto platforms, we did a platform presentation, and for a few weeks I'm giving these beautiful descriptions of these wonderful spirit people, but no one in the room could take them because I wasn't specific enough to ask for someone that can be taken on that day. And she said, I've been doing this for 40 years and I've learned never, ever, ever just assume. I'm like, but that's what I'm here for, isn't it? She went, no, you've got to be specific because the intention is everything. And I know that's pretty rigid, but it seems to work really well, and the days I forget it, I struggle.
I'll back that up. Your intent is paramount.
Yeah.
And like you say, you develop yourself first. You make yourself that fit vessel for the other things to unfold, but your intent. I hear people saying, oh, come on, Spirit, help me. And I would imagine Spirit's going, help you do what? What do you want? Crossword puzzle? Where did you leave the TV remote? Give me a clue. But if you sit yourself with Spirit and set that intent, and you might have to reword it and reword it and reword it over and over again until you just get that intent over. But I think, for all protection-wise, I think it comes from yourself. Because if you touch on it, thought forms.
Yeah. Well, even if you don't see the auric field, you can visualize in your mind an aura around you and fill it with light, and that is more than enough to cleanse your aura. There's so many different disciplines you can study where it talks about cleansing the aura, but really, every morning you wake up with a fresh start. If you want to carry over all your problems from yesterday, you can, but if you don't, you're kind of resetting, getting a clean slate every morning. And you give yourself that, because you're the one that carries your problems over. I know that debts and problems, they follow you into the next day, but how you deal with them the next day, So I think, although people talk about cleansing and resetting your aura, I firmly believe we get a chance every time we open our eyes in the morning to start again. And so you worry about, those aura cameras you get at spirit fairs. Now, they're programmed to know where the chakras are. They're not seeing them because they're not real in that sense. But they do pick up changes of energy in the field and relate them to colours. So I don't think the actual camera is doing that great a job, but it gives you an idea. But when I have had that done, the reading I got from the gentleman was first class. But the actual picture, it was nice. It was a nice little take home. But really, the aura should come alive in your mind's eye. When I've seen it physically around a person, it's very, very subtle. And when I did the exercise to see the aura, what I find is if the person you're looking at's got a white background behind them, and you don't focus on the aura, you focus on their nose or their mouth or their chin, and then the aura comes alive around them. The minute you try and look at the aura, it just disappears. But that's it's those magic eye puzzles that you used to do, where you got to watch it for a while and it merges together. It's just like that. And also going back to cartoons as kids, if anyone remembers He-Man, where he'd pull his sword out and this electricity is pumping out of him, when you do see the aura, it's that powerful, and it really puts you, it gives you a slap on the face and says, this is serious, this is real power. And like we were saying earlier, power corrupts, and ultimate power corrupts ultimately. So again, when people start doing spiritual work and you keep getting problems and setbacks and resistance, there's a reason. This power, this energy, if it can corrupt you, if you're working with spirit and you're being guided by a higher source, you can be comfortable knowing that you're only progressing as far as is right and healthy for you. If you try to push it and start doing rituals beyond what you're ready for and trying to be the big guru when you've only just come into it. You're in for a world of trouble, and you might not understand why you're not getting anywhere. And it's because you've got to unfold naturally. And you know, like we said about the Egyptians going through the morning, afternoon, evening, midnight, and through the year. The Egyptians, they had the riddle of the Sphinx: what walks on 4 legs in the morning, 2 legs in the day, and 3 legs in the evening. And the answer is a human being. You crawl around on 4 legs in the morning, you walk upright during the day, and then you might walk with a stick in the evening of your life. Because all they were concerned about was the progress of the soul on earth and then into the afterlife. And they remind you every single day that, because you meet different people in different stages of their life every day, and you are just seeing yourself reflected. And if you don't have the spiritual eyes to see it, you miss all these little lessons every day. And the elements help you, remind you of that through your day and through your year.
Any more?
Yeah, well, sorry, Stephen. When you say you see auras, is that everyone? Like in this room, could you see auras?
Yes, and not everyone's the same. But like I say, we change through the day, let alone through the years. But then when you look at animals, most humans have more or less the same aura, but some people just don't seem to have that spiritual layer to them. You don't see much around them at all. But then they're very guarded, protected, materialistic. They're not thinking that way. They might be very superstitious and scared. So they're naturally not open. For someone to be naturally open with their aura for all the world to see, they're also equally taking it all in. And if they're not careful, they'll take in everyone's thoughts, dreams. And I've had this deep and spiritual thought. I was painting this this magic board that I was making anyway. And then I realised it was 10:30 and the corner shop, well, Asda was going to close at 11 and I was running out of tobacco. So I've gone straight down there, middle of Fratton on 11 o'clock at night, and the people there were just the worst people in Portsmouth. As I walked in there, and I swear I could have written down all their names, addresses, telephone numbers. I had to turn around, shut myself down, bring myself back to earth before I went in there, because I could feel everyone in there and it wasn't nice. You know. But again, when you see dogs and cats and animals that have been around humans, have got a strong relationship with humans, I see that spiritual aura as well as just an etheric. But I feel we're passing our humanity onto them as they're growing spiritually. And then you look at some animals that have no interaction with humans, and they got very basic animus. You know, the etheric body is powerful, but there's no spiritual counterpart. And I don't know why that is. You know, we all see these animals in our meditations. The spirit world is supposed to be full of all the animals that we find on earth as well as others. But there does seem to be a difference between different animals as to whether they've got that spiritual, dare I say, human layer around them. And there's some people that don't seem to have that either.
It's strange, I wanted to change the subject, it's disappeared now, but for quite a couple of months when I used to come to church, I was sort of sitting over there and I'd look up and I'd see this thing spinning around. Never said
Fan.
it to like, no, it says watch,
Oh yeah.
move your wrist.
Oh, right.
Oh,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Always look for the obvious.
No, that's it's like the same with the aura. It's the thing you see out the corner of your eye, but when you look, it's gone.
Yeah, I
And the aura is
understand that.
exactly the same.
Yeah.
It's so subtle, but when you do manage to do the exercise and you do focus like on the nose or somewhere else, it can be quite an overwhelming experience because you suddenly remember you're not just reading this in a book, it's not just a theory, you're actually seeing the true power of someone's spiritual body, and it's far more than our bodies give credit for. You know, and again, it's not some, you know, Olympic athlete you're looking at. It's someone sat very quietly in a chair, it's got health problems, but their spiritual body is alive and vibrant because of the spiritual work they've done, not the physical work, you know. Yeah.
You will one day, love. Don't be in a hurry. But it's very true as well. When you can sense the aura to that degree, you just look at people and you just pick up.
If anyone asks me to do an aura reading, my mind goes blank and I have to say no because I just can't do it.
Yeah,
But
not on demand, but if you can get that state of awareness, and it is just through casual conversation, you can just go, oh, how's so-and-so? Oh, funny you should ask, because that's really playing up at the moment.
Yeah.
Because the aura is the book as well, isn't it?
Yeah,
So,
and like if we do an exercise in circle, we just get a piece of paper and we put on the left side the material world, on the right side the spiritual world, and one's a psychic reading, one's a spiritual reading, and we just ask the person to put down on this side what images they get, put down on that side what images they get, and then tell a story with it, and that really helps you to work on your on all the elements in your spiritual body, you know, and we call it an aurograph. Even though you're not drawing the aura, you are picking out from that person's aura information, and it comes in the form of these images, and then you can use the elements to relate to them. So if you see a frog, you might not know what that means. The spirit world uses symbolism. So when you study shamanism with the elements, suddenly you're like, oh, I know what a frog means now. It's emotional stability. But otherwise it's just confusing.
it does link in and bring to mind the importance of the education with spiritualism. It really is, it goes hand in hand. That as you develop spiritually, you've got to start looking into the back. We've got the world's compendium of knowledge on our phones now. There's no excuse anymore.
Well, there was before we had all this knowledge, you call it nascience. There was no science, so you're excused for not knowing. Now you can only be accused of ignorance because it's out there, and it's so easy to go, oh, but there's so much to learn. I don't really know where to start. These 4 elements make it really simple, and you'll find them everywhere. When you go and study astrology, you're already starting on a point of knowing about the elements. And so as soon as you start looking at each star sign as being either cardinal, fixed or mutable, earth, water, fire, suddenly you know something about that person and how you relate to them. And I mean, with astrology, it's you suspend your disbelief, but as Carl Jung said it best, don't criticise it till you studied it. And once you've studied it, you'll realise that it is actually a science. It's just of a degree that we haven't quite comprehended yet.
Can I ask you one more thing? Oh,
Yeah.
sorry, Ted. Go on. No, you were hand up before, didn't you?
I was going to say, everything you've said this evening, the way you've put it, it's in, how can I say, simple language.
Yeah.
Even an idiot like me can understand it. But when I think back to when I was a young boy and a young man, I mean, I'm going back to the war now. The only communication we had was the radio, which was controlled by the government anyway. But nowadays, you've got the internet, you've got social media, you've got television. Do you think people today are getting loads and loads of small items through listening and watching and all the rest that are of no real consequence, but they're all worried to death about it?
I think it's a bit of both. The telephone didn't kill off spiritualism or mediumship, neither did the television, but it was a real fear. It's like, well, if people got the telephone, they won't need the churches anymore. Well, if people have got TV, they won't need the churches anymore. The internet was the same, but that's not what we actually see. So on that side, I'm pretty confident. The spirit world will just use the technology we've got available. So when we had the raps and taps of the Hydesville rappings, it was only a few years before that every town in the eastern seaboard of the States got a telegraph in the local post office with Morse code. So the mediumship kind of reflected the common knowledge. Then as you see radio and telephone, we were getting far more direct voice and trance mediumship, and now mental mediumship reflects the mass media that we have, all these different forms of working internally, and there's a lot of electronic phenomena happening that's quite interesting. So on that side I feel pretty positive. On the other side, I don't know, kids, there's one game called Roblox that seems to turn my partner's son into a monster in a way that other games don't, and I think there's a certain amount of brainwashing going on in that, and I'd prefer he didn't play it. He's a lot nicer when he's not on that one game. He's still not that pleasant when it goes off on the other games. There do seem to be some pretty big pitfalls. So again, it's so important that we let our children, because we don't know what they're turning into. There's good and bad's going to come out of everything. We're of a different generation, and our parents are a different generation. The new generation is becoming prepared. I remember the days of VHS. You had to go to the video shop and hire the actual unit with videos, take it home and plug it in. And my parents were struggling with the remote control, and I was only like 4 years old. Oh, ding, 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 works like that. I don't know how I did that now. I'd struggle today. But my nephews, they to pick up an iPhone, they go, Uncle Steve, how come you couldn't turn it on? I was like, I can't. I'm pressing the button. He goes, no, you press it 5 times. Well, how am I supposed to know that? And it doesn't even say in the instructions, because the instructions are online.
Yeah.
So I've got to get online before I can read the instructions, but I can't because I can't turn the phone on. But my nephew, 5 years old, it's so simple, Uncle Steve. Are you old or something? So,
Yeah, but you see, I haven't got an iPhone or whatever they call it, and I live.
Yeah. It is a bit of an illusion that we need these things.
Yeah.
It's
I see them walking along the road, looking at their hands, wondering what they're thinking about.
Me and my partner had this conversation. We really fully intend not letting our youngest have a phone until they're at least a teenager. But we all talk a good game as parents, and then they just somehow smile at us and they get what they want. So I've got to have the confidence that, the spirit world, the human consciousness, we're scared of it being overtaken by electronics, by cyber world AI. And the more the people who seem concerned about it, I don't believe a word that comes out of their mouths. They're saying we should worry about AI, all this fear. What I've learned is that the collective human consciousness that we're all a part of it's not our waking consciousness. We feel limited in our external world because it seems so limited and we can only know so much. And the idea that AI is going to think a lot faster than us, but really we're part of this collective human consciousness. And I don't ever see something that's been created cannot outstrip its creator. And the same way when we look at the universe through magnifying glass, telescope, the universe seems to expand the harder we look at it, and it expands at a more accelerated rate in line with the accelerated rate of our ability to see it. So it's like every time we think we figured the world, suddenly the magnitude of it gets bigger. So you're left with that old saying, all I can really know is how little I know. And there seems to be a bigger picture at play. If we look at the history of mankind, we've been guided through these stages of evolution, and the spirit world is showing us that by default. So there does seem to be a bigger plan. Whether everything is laid out in a very specific order, I'm not sure about that, because I've had some brilliant psychic readings of some wonderful mediums, but a lot of what they said didn't happen because I've made different choices. I think the future's malleable. There's certain things that will have to happen, natural consequences of evolution, but on the whole, nothing ever works out the way you thought it would, good or bad, does it? Nothing ever works out how you thought. Everyone can plan doom and gloom or positive. Nothing ever plans out. There's always a little surprise. And when I was asking my granddad to enlighten me from the spirit world, he said, if I could tell you all the mysteries you're after, it would lose some of its romance. You wouldn't be as eager if the knowledge came so easily, would you? And I sort of smiled, and yeah, it's true. It's a nice adventure to find it. And with kids, when they're staring at their phones all the time, it's easy to think that's a bad thing. But you know, I was laughing because there was a red post box being taken out of a local village, and the local community got together. No, that's been there 100 odd years. You can't take that. And these are the not in my backyard people, you know. They're like, you can't take that, that's part of our history or culture. The same people living at the time that was installed were probably, what's that red monstrosity doing here? Get that out of the village. You're going to ruin everyone's lives, you know. So it's just perspective. This new technology, the postbox that came in, looked at the devil, was painted red so you couldn't miss it. And, you know, people thought that the devil was coming to town. Those same people want to keep it now because it's provided so much good over the years, and the nostalgia over it is so strong. So again, it's just perspective. We see the phone now, we're in fear of it because we're worried about the Pandora's box it's going to open up. But in hindsight, we'll look back on it with fond memories. But I was listening to a podcast the other day, and he said all these science fiction shows you see in film, none of them are staring at their phone. You know, even if they're being made currently, they're like, even the human being making these films, we see a future, we're not going to be walking around like that. And if we are implanted with technology, again, I think the human spirit will overcome any technology we can create.
Well, mister, thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Just to remind you, we have streamed this live tonight, so there is now a recording that you can go back and watch on our YouTube channel or our Facebook page, because there was a mountain of information put forward tonight. So if you want to go back and go over a few bits, please do. That's what it's there for. But just don't walk around with your phone like that, all right? Stephen, yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you so much. Next Wednesday night, so next Wednesday, we have a demonstration of mediumship, and we have Barbara Breeze with us. That's between 7 and 8. Our next awareness night is on the first Monday of July, and we have Sarah Deverell, and she'll be talking about a fairly new thing within our movement, the mentorship program. What it means, what it's about, how it happens, how it evolves. And it is actually quite, if people are looking to develop their spiritualism, I don't just mean their mediumship, their understanding, their own selves, mentorship programs with the right people can be absolutely brilliant. But in the meantime, sir, thank you so much. And thank you all so much for turning up. And thank you to those people watching. I have a lovely Monique Backer on from Holland tonight. She thinks you're lovely.
Thank you.
You haven't met him, Monique. It's not. He's sweating as well. So thank you, Stephen.
Cheers, thank you.
Brilliant.